So let's talk about how to charge your smartphone's battery because according to this article, there is a right and wrong way to charge your smartphone's battery. And this doesn't just apply to smartphone's battery, it also applies to other types of technology that do run on a lithium ion battery. So pretty much any device that is a modern day device that you do charge will actually apply here as well. So maybe for instance, you have a laptop, you have a tablet, you have anything that pretty much runs on a battery that you do have to charge. These tips will actually affect you as well. It's not just smartphones as well, but who would have thought actually there would be a wrong or right way to actually charge a modern day device? Because according to this article, if you don't take these steps and don't do these steps right, apparently it can damage your battery in a couple of different ways. And if you're going to be owning your devices for as long as possible or for many years, you want to make sure, of course, your battery is as healthy as possible. So let's go over the steps you should be taking if you want to maximize your battery longevity and make sure your battery lasts as long as possible. First of all, one of the biggest key things that you should never do with your battery on your modern day device is apparently never charge it to 100%. I know a lot of people plug in their chargers, they wait until the charger hits 100% and then they take it off the charger, or you charge it overnight and then it hits 100% and then you unplug your device. But apparently that's not good for the battery, because apparently even after it hits 100%, there's still charges cycling through to the battery, and since there's still voltage going to the battery, even though it already hits 100%, apparently it'll put a little bit of wear on your device. Is it something, honestly, you should lose sleep over? Honestly, I don't think it's something you should lose sleep over. I think it's even okay to actually charge your device overnight, because I think modern day smartphones and modern day devices that have lithium ion batteries won't really take too much damage if you actually charge it to 100%. It kind of slows the cycle of the voltage down when you're already at 100%. But apparently, if you want to get the most longevity out of your battery in the long run, you don't want to charge it to 100%. They actually said anywhere between 80% to maybe like 95% would be adequate for these batteries if you want to keep these batteries as healthy as possible. But who really actually looks at their battery on their devices when we're actually talking about lithium ion batteries? I feel like a lot of people just forget about it, or you have a lot going on in your life. You don't think about the battery situation in the back of your mind, and alongside you probably not really damaging the battery by the time like 4 or 5 years hit. In the long run, it won't really matter, but I guess apparently it does still take more effect on the battery if you were to actually charge it to 100% than not charge it to 100%. Another thing you never want to do with modern day devices with lithium ion batteries, you actually never want to make the battery hit 0%, because apparently it is bad for the battery if you discharge them all the way. So make sure you never discharge the battery all the way to 0% where the phone actually turns off, because apparently that is bad for the battery as well. Apparently what you want to do with these devices is you want to wait until they hit about 40 to like maybe 35%, and then around that time you want to try to charge the device as soon as possible, because apparently it is good for the device. Another thing that they did state is, even though you may think it is bad to charge your device all the time, apparently it is actually pretty healthy for the device to actually be charged all the time, and you're supposed to charge it quite frequently. Even like for instance, you see your battery gauge at only like 65%, 60, 70, you kind of want to charge it, because apparently charging it all the time again is actually pretty healthy for the device, and it keeps the cycles moving. And apparently even if you charge it at like 70%, 60%, 50%, even though you may have already charged it recently, apparently it won't count it as a full cycle towards the battery's depletion, which apparently of course is actually good. So keep that in mind as well. I think it only counts it every time it's fully to 100% every time. So even like for instance, if you charged it from like 50% to 80%, it's kind of hard to explain how it actually works, but for instance, it's not going to count every time you just plug in the cable to charge it as an actual cycle for the battery. So that's actually pretty interesting to know as well. So that's some tips and tricks if you want to maximize the battery life on your modern day device. It's not like most people are probably doing this because, let's be honest, we live busy lives. A lot of people don't think about their smartphone's battery or their battery on, like, for instance, their laptop or their tablet or a device that has a rechargeable battery. Of course, we don't have time for that, but those are just some tips if you want to try to keep your battery healthy as long as possible, because let's face it, these batteries do degrade, and even if you use these tips, of course, these batteries will still degrade over time, whether you like it or not. They'll just degrade slower rather than faster if you don't take these measures. And I guess before I move on, one thing I did forget to mention is the fact that apparently also fast chargers are a no-no. They're not like they'll destroy your battery, but if you want to make your battery last as long as possible, fast chargers are not recommended, just because it puts too much voltage on the battery at a very rapid pace at a very short time, and apparently that's not good for the battery, since the battery always has to heat up. That's another thing I did forget to mention. In this article, they did state that you should never ever have your battery in situations where your battery is being stressed. Like, for instance, if you keep your smartphone, your laptop, whatever device in your car for long periods of time, especially if the car is just very hot, apparently that's not good for the battery, because the battery does heat up, and that does put a lot of stress on the battery. Same thing with cold situations. Apparently too much cold can actually be bad for the battery as well. You want to keep it at a pretty moderate temperature. So most likely, if you store your device like in your house, of course, you will be okay, and it won't damage your device and your battery. Your battery will stay healthy if you do that as well. But again, those are some tips if you wanted to maximize your battery and keep your battery as healthy as possible. Now, the next one is actually about the upcoming PlayStation 5, because it is very interesting. The PlayStation 5 is actually going to be supporting PS4 controllers on the upcoming PS5. However, there is going to be one big catch, and of course, the one big catch here is the fact that PS4 controllers will absolutely not work with PS5 games. Sony already confirmed that. They'll only work with backwards compatible games, so basically PS4 games is the only thing it'll work with. And honestly, I'm still pretty happy about this, even though you couldn't use these controllers for PS5 games. But honestly, I don't know why you would honestly want to use a PS4 controller with a PS5 controller, because looking at the DualSense for the PS5, first of all, it does look more comfortable in my eyes, but the thing is, with the PS5 controller, you are going to get all the benefits of the DualSense controllers, like the haptic feedback in the triggers. You will get that HD Rumble-esque effect. It will be more comfortable. It'll work better with the system, and that's what Sony recommends. They actually said that's the reason why they didn't put the they didn't use the PS4 controller for PS5 games, to be honest. That's what they said, and that does make sense, because you want to take all advantage of the PS5 controller when you're actually playing PS5 games. One thing Sony didn't clarify, from what I'm reading, is they didn't clarify if you could actually use a PS5 controller on PS4 games, because that would actually be very nice, especially since I can see some people buying the PS5, never owning a PS4, or selling their PS4 for whatever reason, and then trying to play like a backwards compatible game, but their PS5 controller not being compatible with it, and then them running out and having to buy a PS4 controller, which is an extra cost, and it would technically kind of be a downgrade, since, like I said before, at least looking at the PS5 controller, it does look like a more comfortable controller in the long run. So I'm actually hoping that the PS5 controller will be backwards compatible with PS4 games, because that would be a shame if this thing came out backwards compatibility and it has to use PS4 controllers for PS4 games, because then it would mean a lot of people wouldn't be able to play these backwards compatible games on their PS5, which would be a shame. But that's actually very interesting. I never thought they would actually allow PS4 controllers on the PS5, and it does say it's not just going to be first-party PS5 controllers from Sony, any officially licensed third-party controller. So it has to be officially licensed from Sony. That's a third-party controller that will work. So if you have any other controllers laying around, they might actually work with the PS5 when we're talking about PS4 backwards compatibility, which is very interesting. And then the last one on my list is actually about Halo Infinite. I know there's been a lot of news and talk about Halo Infinite, and Halo Infinite has been in the news for a little while now, and basically what Microsoft has confirmed, that Halo Infinite will have free multiplayer. But what does free multiplayer actually mean? Because they don't actually clarify this up. They just say it's going to have free multiplayer. What does that actually mean? Does that mean, for instance, you have to have Xbox Live, or you have to have Games Pass to actually play the free multiplayer? Or is it going to be something that's going to be included for anybody who owns like an Xbox Series X, for instance? Because right now, as we speak, you may not know this if you don't own an Xbox One, but basically how free-to-play games work that do have free online multiplayer. Like, for instance, Fortnite is a free-to-play game, and that is an online multiplayer game. And unfortunately, with those type of games, at least as we speak right now with the Xbox One, you do actually need an online subscription to actually play those games, which is kind of interesting because for me, that kind of defeats the purpose of the game being a free-to-play game. So it's kind of like, well, Fortnite is free, but there's a big condition to play the game. The condition is you do need a Xbox Live Gold to actually play the game, and it's kind of like, well, that defeats the purpose of it being free. So I don't understand why Microsoft does that. I know why they do it, of course. They want money in their pocket, and of course that does make sense. And there are a lot of fans of Fortnite, and I'm sure there's people paying for Xbox Live Gold just to play Fortnite, just because they have no other choice, and that's their only console or their only device to play games like that. So I can see that actually being a thing. So we're going to have to wait and see what Microsoft actually says about the Halo Infinite multiplayer actually being free, because who knows what that actually means. It would be pretty awesome, of course, if this thing came out and it was actually free to play with the actual Xbox Series X. That would actually be very cool, because that would give a reason for a lot of people to buy the system outright, just to play Halo's Infinite's multiplayer aspect, just because that is a big deal when it comes to the Microsoft branding and Halo as a whole. Because let's face it, a lot of people who play Halo only want to play the multiplayer, even myself included. I'm a big fan of the multiplayer of Halo, so if this thing was free and we could just play it without having to buy Halo or even buying Xbox Live Gold or some type of Games Pass, that would actually be pretty awesome. And they did actually say that Halo Infinite is actually going to support frame rates up to 120 frames per second. Keep in mind, it does say up to 120 frames per second, so we don't know how much of Halo Infinite is going to support 120 frames per second. How stable is the 120 frames per second? I'm still personally curious, as a fan of video games and as a fan of next generation hardware. I'm still very curious if they're going to do something along the lines of PC hardware, where you can customize the settings between performance and gameplay, or gameplay versus performance. Like, for instance, if you wanted the resolution high but the frame rate lower, or the frame rate higher but the gameplay the resolution lower. So it is going to be very interesting to see if they actually do that. But just the fact that supposedly we are getting better frame rates than 60 frames per second on next generation hardware has me really excited for next generation hardware, of course. And it would be pretty cool to see all the modern day games on modern day consoles actually support frame rates higher than 60 frames per second. But it's interesting, even on current gen hardware, if we look at something, of course, like the Xbox One, or even the PS4, even with the Pro, or even with the X console, it is interesting that a lot of games still have a lot of problems actually hitting that locked 60 frames per second, and a lot of games have frame rate issues. So I'm assuming, even though these consoles are going to be super impressive when it actually comes to the specs of the system, I can see a lot of games, now that we're moving into more true 4K, and a lot of games are going to play closer to 4K, I can actually see a lot of games having problems not hitting the actual 120 frames per second. Honestly, for me personally, I would be really okay if more games were actually locked at 60 frames per second, since again, like I said before, this generation, a lot of games couldn't even hit a locked 60 frames per second. So maybe with this more power, a lot of games can could at least be bare minimum 60 frames per second. What I'm actually hoping is, this generation, a lot of games don't even target 30 frames per second. Maybe the bare minimum now is going to be 60, because looking back on this generation, like I said again, a lot of games aren't 60 frames per second, and a lot of games are actually more closer to 30 frames per second, or they have a big variable when it comes to the frame rate. The frame rate has a lot of pacing problems depending on what game it is, but there are some impressive games that do actually hit mostly 60 frames per second, so that's going to be interesting. So either way, we are going to be getting better frame rates no matter how you look at it, at least with the next generation of consoles, and that's something that's got me very interesting as well. And then I guess another story which is also related to the next upcoming Xbox, the Xbox Series X. Apparently, Microsoft is planning maybe potentially to getting rid of Xbox Live Gold subscriptions. Maybe no longer people will be subscribing to that. Maybe it'll just be a thing where you're just pretty much forced to buy Games Pass. It could be something like that where you automatically get it with every version of Games Pass, whether you pay for Games Pass Ultimate or whether you pay for the regular Games Pass at $10. They may actually be doing away with Games Pass, and I actually think that's very interesting, to say the least, just because we've had Xbox Live Gold or Xbox Live for many decades now, and we're just so accustomed to actually paying for our online multiplayer sessions. Maybe it is time to go in another direction, because if you look at the PC space, of course, with PC games, no matter what platform you're on, whether you're on the Epic Games Store, whether you're on Steam, whether you're on all these different outlets that do host games on the PC, you don't typically pay for online multiplayer when it comes to PC gaming. So it would be a different step in a different direction for the Xbox brand if they actually did away with Xbox Live and they didn't actually allow you to actually pay for your online multiplayer sessions. Some people said they would make it free outside of Xbox Games Pass and you wouldn't pay for it altogether, but however, you would just get the bare minimum of the online experience. You would just be able to play with people online. However, if you wanted to have like a friends list, or if you wanted to have like parties or voice communication, those things wouldn't be able to you, because you would have to pay like a premium for that kind of stuff. But I think for certain people out there, that would be okay, because for instance, some people just don't want to actually talk to people online, or they don't really have a friends list. They don't really care about that stuff. All they care about is actually going online and playing their favorite online multiplayer game online with random strangers online. So I would be okay with that kind of situation if they made Xbox Live free. However, you don't get any of the premium features with that. That would be cool. Or I guess they could actually bundle it with Games Pass as well, and I would be okay with that, because let's face it, if you're paying $10 a month, or $14 a month for Games Pass Ultimate, it is actually a deal. You do have to remember you are going to be getting games included with Games Pass, so it's kind of like a win-win situation, even though you're like, well, I'm still technically paying for Xbox Live through Xbox Games Pass. I think you'd be happy anyway, because you have to buy games anyway, so this would be a good incentive for you to get pretty much free games alongside your Xbox Live subscription. So just pretty much think about it this way: you pretty much would be paying for Xbox Live Gold or Xbox Live, and then alongside that you would pretty much be getting free games monthly with that subscription. So either way, it's a win-win. And I think people who are paying for Xbox Live Gold right now, who are paying the subscription for that, if they did end up having to switch over to Games Pass, I think it would even be a win-win situation. So we'll have to wait and see what happens next generation with online multiplayer and with Microsoft's upcoming Halo situation and everything like that. And yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up today's episode. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.